You're listening to Just Hit Play with your hosts, Peter and Nick Cabral. If you're tired of your stagnant, streamed music feed, then strap yourselves in for an intergenerational sonic journey through Peter and Nick's favorite songs.
Welcome to episode 138 of Just Hit Play. I'm your host, Peter, and with me is my co-host, Nick. Nick, how's your day going?
My day's been very nice, actually. I'm off school for a little bit. I have some time to myself to relax and regroup, so I've really been taking advantage, just laying low. I've seen a couple movies this week.
Nice.
And really just trying to rejuvenate, recharge the batteries before September hits again.
Sure. I think you said last week that you went to a cottage. How was cottage life?
Yeah, the cottage life was fantastic. I went with a bunch of my friends from school and my girlfriend Charlotte, and it was honestly so needed. It was really nice. I think all of us, we were in the same boat. We'd all finished school at the same time. Right. We were all ready to let loose a little and just really relax and have a good time. And that's what we did. So it was lovely.
Yeah, I loved going up to a cottage. If someone had a cottage that I knew, or we rented a cottage, it's always nice to get away and on the lake, a different atmosphere, a different kind of world, very slow down. So yeah, I bet that was needed after finishing school.
So dearly needed. Yeah, it was great.
Cool. So we have a heavy topic this week. We're going to listen to Billie Holiday's "Strange Fruit." So if this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, normally what we do is I introduce a song to Nicholas, maybe from my youth or a song that I grew up with listening. And then Nick would introduce me to a song that he likes that's just come out, or a song that he really loves. We changed that up this week just for Billie Holiday and "Strange Fruit" because it is such an iconic song and such an important song. We decided to dedicate just this episode to "Strange Fruit." Like I said, it's a heavy song. It was recorded in 1939. I thought it was the 40s. It was actually 1939. It's based on a poem that was written in 1937, and Billie Holiday recorded it in 1939. Now, this is obviously the oldest song that I've gotten you to listen to. It's not the greatest recording in the world. But before we do all that, Darren, just hit play with Billie Holiday and "Strange Fruit." Okay, Nick, what did you think of Billie Holiday and "Strange Fruit"?
So, I'm definitely familiar with this song only in the sense that I've heard it sampled very prominently. One of my favorite songs ever is "Blood on the Leaves" by Kanye West, and very, very, very prominently features a sample of this song. And in addition, other hip-hop songs also sample this or reference it. It's a song that is actually very prominent in hip-hop culture as a whole, I'd say. I'd heard bits and pieces of it. I'd heard many lines from it. Never the full song, though. And I must say that hearing it as a full song, the way it was recorded, the way it was written, very, very powerful, very impactful, and really helped me take my appreciation of the subject matter and the lyricism and the writing to a different level.
What the song is referencing is the protesting of lynching of Black Americans. With the lyrics, compare the victims of the lynchings to fruit hanging from trees. So I'm going to go into a lot of detail, and my apologies to people that understand what a lynching is, but there could be people out there that just don't have an understanding of what I mean by lynching. Lynching is when a group of people, mostly and almost exclusively white men, will find issue with typically a black person in the South from the 1880s till about the 1960s, and they could be accused of anything from stealing to looking at a white woman to rape, accused of rape, and they take their own justice into their own hands and they hang them from a tree, which they could hang one to many. And that's what the song is referring to. So there's no justice system. It's all just they've taken it upon themselves that these people are guilty, and they lynch them in a tree, and they hang them from a tree. So that's basically what the song's referring to: how strange fruit they look like. Now that's a pretty messed up thing to have happened during, say, that 100 years in American history after the Civil War till about the 1960s. But yeah, that's one crazy thing that happened in America.
I'd even argue there's still examples of that happening today. It may not look the same as it once did. It may not take the form of a big group, big mob exacting justice by hanging someone, but I think there's definitely still examples of racially motivated unjust murders that happen.
All the time. And we've seen George Floyd over the last few years where a lot of police brutality would have happened, where they've singled out black people and they've been shot for no reason. Or, George Floyd, I think he was being arrested for possibly for writing a fraudulent check, and that does not deserve someone to die. If that's illegal, then by all means arrest him or issue a fine. But for someone to lose their life for a fraudulent check for, what was it, $30 or whatever it was, is just incredibly strange.
Well, I'd also say the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery that happened as well. That he was jogging. Yeah. A group of men saw him, thought he looked a bit suspicious and shifty, chased after him in a pickup truck with guns and shot him in the street. And while it may not be the most classical example of lynching, I think incidents like that illustrate that it's not an incident that we can just say happened 100 years ago. This song is still, the meaning and message of this song is something that still holds true today and bears meaning today.
When I was doing research for this, and I knew I was going to be tackling some heavy things, and I figured I was going to get shocked at some points, but there was finally an anti-lynching legislation put in. Do you know what year that anti-lynching legislation was put in? Take a guess.
I have no idea. 1994.
Okay. Yep. 2022.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I thought I was playing it safe, but yeah, no, that's nuts.
No. The last lynching that's been recorded was Emmett Till, who I think he was visiting from Chicago. I think he was visiting the South from Chicago, and he was seen talking to a white girl, and he was lynched. So 67 years after Emmett Till was lynched, they finally passed the bill in 2022, and it's called the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. Now, obviously, lynching is illegal anyway because that is murder. But yeah, it took 67 years after the last episode for the legislation to finally pass.
Yeah, well, it's a nice tribute, I suppose, to Emmett Till that they named that legislation after him. And I must say, to me, the story of Emmett Till is, I think, one of the most tragic examples of lynching or anything of that nature that I've ever heard of or read of. If anyone doesn't know the story of Emmett Till, it is quite horrible for a boy. Like, he was a young boy to be murdered like that. In the manner in which he was, have you seen the pictures of his body? Yeah, horrible stuff. Absolutely horrible stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it's, I don't know if nice is the right word, but it's
symbolic, I guess.
Like I said, it's a nice symbolic gesture, I think, to name it after him.
Well, one of the reasons why it took so long for the anti-lynching bill to come through, they've been trying to do this for years. It was always the Southern senators or Congress members that always would do filibusters, so they would never pass. So they've been trying to do this for 60, 70 years, and it just could never pass the House because of the filibuster and certain white Southern senators or congressmen that always stopped the bill from passing. So there is that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really shocking, is it,
No,
that
not at all.
you
No.
had representatives of states in which the lynchings were taking place predominantly
Mm-hmm.
blocking that legislation? Unfortunately,
Mm,
it's always been a theme, hasn't it?
yeah. Well, I alluded to it a little bit earlier, where I said it's lynchings mostly happen against African Americans, and that is true. But it could occur to anyone who was seen as different. For instance, in 1891, the largest single mass lynching in American history was done against Italian immigrants in New Orleans. So while it was mostly against African Americans, it could go to anyone who was other than white American. So it was used as a system of terrorizing anyone who was new or anyone who was different, especially in the South. So that's how the lynching whole thing started. And I'll just say one more thing before you respond. Some lynchings were even professionally photographed, and those photos were sold as postcards, which you could buy in the United States. So if that's not fucked up, I don't know what is.
That's insane. Yeah, the fact that it was like some form of entertainment,
Mm-hmm.
like a spectacle.
Yep.
Yeah, fucked up is the right way to put it.
Yep.
It really it's easy to stop and think like, oh, like how could people have been capable of such cruelty, right? Like
Yeah.
how could this be a thing that happened in our world? But I think it's important when we're talking about the past like this
Mm-hmm.
to not treat it as if it's things that just happen in the past. It's just
Yeah.
history, because things like this still happen today.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not to the same extent, maybe not to the
Right.
same degree, but these are still things that happen. Like people who are different from the majority are
Mm-hmm.
still subjected to violence purely on the basis that they're different,
But that they're
whether
different. Yep.
it's gender identity, sexual orientation, racial identity, religion. Like these are things that happen all the time, and it's
Yep.
not that we're not capable of being cruel anymore. We certainly are. I think maybe we've
Mm-hmm.
just gotten a bit better at hiding it.
Yeah. I was going to ask you too. When I grew up in the 70s and 80s, hearing jokes and having people make jokes around you about Jews or black people or Polish people or Indians, like, Native Americans, Canadians, also people from India, was so commonplace. Like I remember, I had a neighbor who was from Guyana who lived next door to us, and we were playing baseball one day, and a friend of mine had to borrow a baseball glove, and he wouldn't borrow his baseball glove because he was black, and he didn't want to get his hands in the baseball glove. So that was pretty common growing up in the 70s and 80s for me. Um, Myself too. It wasn't until I got a little bit older, experienced the world a little bit more, education. I just, I've met people from all over the world. I've been to a lot of places in the world, that my mindset could understand how fucked up that was, and see how wrong it is, and better myself and my thinking. What was it like growing up? Because you would have grown up in a completely different era than me. Obviously, you're in your 20s and I'm 50. So what was it like growing up in your era? Do you remember anything like that? What were your experiences?
So I my upbringing was definitely very different from yours.
Mm,
Uh, I grew up in a town that, as I was growing up in it and I was a child, it was being converted from a small town to a commuter town.
you're right.
It
Milton. Yeah.
was a lot of people. Yeah, it was a lot of people with jobs in Toronto or close to Toronto that were moving to Milton because it was cheap property, easy access to better jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the fastest growing town in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, I believe, at one
Mm-hmm.
point even. So that led to the town, extremely multicultural, extremely
Mm-hmm.
diverse. Even I can remember like 2004 when I started going to school. There were a wide range of ethnicities in my class.
Mm-hmm.
So from literally as young as I can remember, I've been surrounded by people of different races,
Right.
religions, and worldviews, beliefs. And I think that's made me who I am today, is someone who is extremely accepting and tolerant of all different types of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And I see that in mostly everybody that I knew that grew up in Milton. I see that in as well. If they don't have the same outlook, it's likely
Yeah.
because of their parents' influence, right?
Hmm.
These views being passed on, and they haven't been able to break out of them.
Yeah.
But I think in people who still live in very rural areas, who aren't really exposed to that many people who are different than themselves, I think you still have some of that same mentality. It's maybe just
Hmm.
quieter now because it's not as socially acceptable to make those jokes and comments as it once
Hmm.
was.
Um, I live in Australia now. I live in Brisbane, Australia. I've moved here in 2007 from Toronto or from Mississauga, where I was living. I even found that living in Australia was a little bit different, a little backwards when I first moved here compared to Canada. So when I moved to Australia in 2007, I worked at a bank in Canada, and I specifically targeted non-for-profit organizations in that I wanted to work into Australia. I didn't want to work for an insurance company. I didn't want to work for a bank. So I targeted specific industries. And I got a job working in a call center that assisted deaf and hearing impaired Australians communicate. Right. So that was the job. And I had a team of about, say, 20 agents that I assisted. Pretty new to the job, we were expanding, and I was doing phone interviews for potential new employees. And the manager at the time told me specifically, which I couldn't believe, that I was to not hire anyone who had an Indian accent because they did not want anyone to think that our call center was based in India and that they're hard to understand. Um, so that completely blew my mind, and I was unhappy with that, and I didn't heed his warning at all, and I interviewed anyone who was qualified. But that was the direction I received from my center manager, who ran a multi-million dollar company. So yeah, that goes to show you how weird the world is sometimes.
Yeah, there's still like we can as a people, like we can gain
Mm-hmm.
tolerance and acceptance by exposure and
Mm.
understanding that even though people may look different or act different, they're still uh, you know more similar to us than they are
Yeah,
different.
exactly.
But there's still I think in some people there's still these some views or outlooks that are so strongly instilled
Mm-hmm.
that even that won't really touch them. And I think in my experiences with those people, nothing really will change how they
No,
look,
no.
how their outlook, and
Yeah.
it's too bad. But at the same time, the way I think of it is those people are being left behind by the
Mm.
world, by society, by
Absolutely.
how we
Yeah.
progress. They're being left behind, and if those are the views they want to cling on to, they
Mm-hmm.
can.
Yeah, it's gotten so much better. I'm so happy that every year we're more progressive. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of fucked up things that are happening in the world. There's a lot of right wing movements that are happening in the world. If you look at the politics in England and Hungary, where there's a lot of right wing authoritarianism coming place, and what's happening in America with Trumpism coming back, the world is pretty messed up. But I think we're in a much better place than we were when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s. Um, so we are a little bit better. We have a lot of stuff to do still, but we're getting a little bit better. Yeah, and kids of your generation, I say kid because I'm 50 and I'm allowed to call you a kid. Even kids of your generation, I think, are so much better than, and education wise and feelings wise, than any kid from my generation. So I'm really happy about that.
I think 50 is actually the exact age or cutoff where you can start saying
Right?
kid
Calling
to
people
anyone
kids. Yeah.
younger than you.
Yeah.
I think it's exactly 50 where that starts.
I think you're right. Um, So I also wanted to talk about the civil rights movement, because that is fascinating, how the civil rights movement started. So it really took off in after World War II, and there's a specific reason why it took off after World War II, because all these black soldiers would have gone over to Europe, and they would have been fighting in segregation or segregated battalions or divisions, and they were literally dying for a country that they were themselves not fully citizens of, and they were treated so badly in America. And they would go to England and they would go to France, and a lot of black soldiers were here in Australia, and they were treated so much better in England and France, where they could go wherever they wanted to go. They can go into bars where anyone can go to. And it was that movement, those people coming back to America, that really started the civil rights movement in the 50s, and which culminated into getting the Civil Rights Act passed in the 60s. So it was really that era that is responsible for the civil rights movement in the 60s. So yeah, World War II is how it all started.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, if you're being treated poorly at home by people of the country that you're risking your life day in day out to fight for,
Yep.
And then you go elsewhere and you see, oh, I don't necessarily have to be treated like this. That would be huge. Like that would really shake my world. I think that would really challenge everything that I thought. So it's no surprise to me that was a catalyst for the civil rights movement.
And, Martin Luther King Jr. would have won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, and that put him on the map. And I think he was Time Magazine Person of the Year when that was an important distinction, when Time Magazine mattered more than it does now. So, yeah, it was the 60s was a very, I don't know if you understand. The 60s was a very volatile decade, maybe the most volatile decade, maybe since the French Revolution. When it came to like what was happening around the world with politics and things, in America, you had Martin Luther King was assassinated, Malcolm X was assassinated, JFK was assassinated, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. You had, the hippie movement happening, where, the Vietnam War was happening. The 60s was a messed up time in America, and it flowed on to England, it flowed on to France. The 60s was a weird time, was a weird decade. I don't know how much you know about that.
Yeah, I know. I'd say a decent amount, more than average amount than someone of my age of that events of that time period.
Right.
I do actually have a sneaking, suspicious feeling that people of the future may look back on the 2020s in a not so dissimilar way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's we're in a bit of a really crazy period right now. And there's so many factors to it. Global warming's a factor. Canada's on fire right now in the West and in the East. There are places burning. Like, I never thought I would hear Banff and Jasper being on fire. Like, there's glaciers in those areas, but they're burning down. Newfoundland is burning down. Like, Toronto was flooded a few weeks ago. And there's so many people coming to America, trying to enter America illegally or illegally from the South, because a lot of that is because of climate change. I think there is something's going to happen soon where it's going to really mess up the world. Especially, we had the hottest day recorded in history a few days ago, where the average temperature in the world was 17 degrees, which is hotter than any other day ever recorded. I think there's some messed up things about to happen. I don't know how you feel. I don't know if I'm being a pessimist, but yeah, it's pretty crazy right now.
Oh no, I actually completely agree. I'm at the stage in my life where I'm really starting to think deeply about, like, where do I want to, maybe move to when I have the freedom to do that? Where do I want to plant some roots down? And honestly, one of the biggest factors in thinking about that sort of stuff is what places are equipped to deal with climate change well. There's different metrics, and there's like a thing called a climate change readiness score that's assigned to different places all over the world. So that's something I've been looking closely at. But yeah, I think it's definitely, it's a no-brainer that something like that's going to happen soon, or even it's just going to be a slow accumulation of events that happen. But your thought?
It's always going to affect people of color and poor people first. Anytime there's a traumatic experience like global warming, it's always going to affect those people first. So yeah, it's quite sad, but I think you're about to go into a different direction, please. So please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to bring it back to the 1960s because Malcolm X is a figure that I've heard a lot about, but never really delved too deeply into his history. I've always wanted to, because the things that I have heard about him really, I don't know, they fascinate me, and I'm intrigued by Malcolm X, the person that he was. I know a lot of friends of mine who are more politically active, more politically inclined, all very much look up to Malcolm X. And so I'm just curious, like, what could you have to say about him? We know, or most of us know, a lot about Martin Luther King Jr. His story and his importance has been very, very well documented. I think he's one of the most important men in American history. But Malcolm X, I feel, doesn't have much of the same limelight. So maybe you could just talk about him for a bit.
Yeah. For me personally, I'm a pacifist, so I've always leaned more towards the Martin Luther King Jr., the Gandhi sort of side of things, nonviolent, peaceful protest. That's where I've always sort of leaned towards. But I get, as Aretha Franklin said, if you have no peace, then you have to disturb the peace. And I'm paraphrasing what she said badly, but something similar to that. A figure like Malcolm X, I could see as being very important. He was obviously more of a violent struggle than Martin Luther King was, and obviously he also paid the ultimate price and was assassinated. But yeah, he definitely would have gone more the other route and was much more of a disobedience physically than MLK Jr. So that's why I've always leaned more towards Martin Luther King.
Right. But Malcolm X, would you say like he still had like some level of influence there? Like,
oh God,
how like what was his influence like?
Yeah, his influence was huge. The Black Panther movement was going strong in the '60s, and like I said, you had all these guys coming back from World War II that knew how to they knew how to fire a gun. Right? They knew order. They would have gained a lot of skills being in the army. You know, they would have learned a profession. So the Black Panther movement was probably armed by the U.S. government in some sense, not intentionally, I'm guessing. But they had a lot of power, and that had. I'd say if it wasn't for the Black Panther movement or that sort of side of things, would the Civil Rights Act have been signed? I don't know. There was obviously a lot of unrest and a lot of things happening at the time. So yeah, without that, you probably wouldn't have got the Civil Rights movement, the Civil Rights Act signed. So yeah.
Well, I can say personally, one of my I'd say that one of the historical figures I look up to the most, or I'm the most inspired by across history, is Fred Hampton. Are you familiar with Fred Hampton?
A little bit, but please tell us about Fred Hampton.
Yeah, Fred Hampton. He was an activist, and he rose to prominence in his early 20s in Chicago when he became chair of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party, and he became deputy chairman of the National Black Panther Party. And he founded this what was called the Rainbow Coalition, which was an anti-racist and anti-classist coalition that was fighting for progressive ideals in the civil rights movement. And what I really liked about the Rainbow Coalition was he got white groups, Hispanic groups to all come together. It wasn't just about. It wasn't just Black people fighting for civil rights. He mobilized it as everybody fighting for civil rights. He did a lot of work ending infighting among Chicago street gangs, and really what I like most about Fred Hampton is he really had a focus on looking at ideas of class, of workers' rights. He was really big on all that stuff, and essentially, as the FBI or CIA tends to do, he was identified as a radical threat to the regime and was assassinated by the FBI at the age of 21.
No surprise. You look at what J. Edgar Hoover was in. I think he was in charge of the CIA for a very long time. Known to keep records of John Lennon and all sorts of people. Had apparently records on Kennedy and whether he believed in the assassination was done inside or whatever. It's not, you can believe whatever you want. But yeah, there is a lot. The 60s was a weird time to be around in the States, that's for sure.
Yeah, the Fred Hampton assassination was December of 1969. So
Right.
that's sort of bookmarked a very tumultuous decade.
Yeah. Going back to Malcolm X, he had this really interesting way that he spoke, and he changed the way he spoke depending on who his audience was, and a lot of really good orators do that. But if he ever spoke to an all-white audience, you would see his ability change completely, where he was more measured and quiet, and then when he would speak to like a Black Panther movement or an all black people, he would be much more animated and much more expressive. So he had a really great ability to change his speaking to who his audience was. That was one of the brilliant things about Malcolm X. He was brilliant in that way.
Yeah, I definitely intend on doing a bit more of a deep dive into Malcolm X, the man. As I said, I'm very much inspired by Fred Hampton, and from what I've heard, Malcolm X is a similar character. So I definitely want to do some more of my own research into him. And while we're on the topic as well, if anyone hasn't seen the movie Judas and the Black Messiah, it's all about Fred Hampton. His story came out in 2021.
I haven't seen that yet, but I want to see that movie. Yeah.
Fantastic movie, like truly incredible movie. So I highly, highly, highly recommend. Daniel Kaluuya won an Oscar for his portrayal of Fred Hampton. It's great.
And there's a weird part of American history too, where the KKK and black people were working together to get people to emigrate, to move back to Africa. The only time black people in the KKK ever worked together, there's the country. I think I'm getting my history right. There's the country Liberia, which is in Africa, where a lot of Africans from the States were moving back to Africa, and a lot of that was funded by black people in the KKK.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I Strange, mean, I guess the KKK would definitely be for that. So
yeah, they had a joint purpose. Yeah,
makes sense.
Yeah, weird part of history. Yeah. Let's get back to Billie Holiday for a couple seconds, because obviously that's who we're talking about. One of the greatest American singers early on that we've ever experienced. She was born Eleanor Fagan, and took her name from I believe she didn't really know who her father was, but she thought she knew who her father was, so she took her last name from her father and then an actress that she admired. So that's how she came up with the name Billie Holiday. Passed away very young. She was 44 when she passed, due to heart failure. And she, again, had a really rough life. She was an addict. She was a junkie, spent time in jail. It really affected her vocal performances later on in life. So yeah, a really sad character, Billie Holiday, but what an important singer in the U.S.
Yeah, as I said, this song's legacy really has lived on to the point where it's still influencing music to this day. People are still sampling it, still referencing it. And that really, I think, is one of the greatest measures of a song's greatness.
So you were talking about the Kanye West Blood on the Leaves song. So let's talk about that song. I don't know it. So tell me about that song. What's it like? I'm assuming it's also about lynching and strange fruit kind of thing. So please tell us about that song.
Sure, I can talk a little bit about that, but it actually is going to be your song for next week.
Oh, okay. We'll talk about it next week. No. But, save it. I didn't know that. Yeah.
No. I'll do a bit of a lead up. Suffice it to say, as I said, the sample features very prominently. It's a 6-minute long sprawling song, and it definitely deals with racial themes and centers around the Black experience in America. It's a bit more closely tied to the modern day, and definitely got a very Kanye spin on things.
Cool.
Nothing anti-Semitic. That's not what I mean by it. But
yeah. Thank God.
It's definitely some very interesting observations he's making about the Black experience.
Oh, so, cool. Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
I just want to say one last thing about Billie Holiday before I tell you my song for next week for you. There was something called a Cafe Society in New York City in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. And for her performance of Strange Fruit, she would have the waiter silence the crowd when the song began. And during the song's long introduction, the lights would dim, and all you would have is one little small spotlight on her face. And she would begin to sing. And then as the song finished, it would just go into darkness and she would leave the stage. That would have been, if I would have seen that, holy shit, that would have been maybe the performance I'd ever seen in my entire life, to see Billie Holiday sing this song in New York City in the 50s with that atmosphere. That would have blew my mind. So yeah, I just wanted to say that, like, what stagemanship, brilliant. I couldn't, like, I would have loved to have seen that.
Yeah, that would have been absolutely electric stuff. Like I can't even imagine how crazy that would be.
Yeah. So yeah, thank God for Billie Holiday, an amazing singer, tragic life. Died in 1959 at the age of 44. So yeah, thank you, Billie Holiday, for having this little piece of art and little piece of history for us today. And I'm glad we got to talk about it. This is a song I've been avoiding for a long time because it's such a heavy subject matter. But yeah, I thought we should probably tackle it. So I'm glad we did.
Yeah, and I'd say it's really important to have ongoing conversations about things like this, and not just do it as a one-off tribute during Black History Month, for example,
Absolutely.
or when an important anniversary or holiday comes around. Like I think it's nice to just normalize talking about these things in general. So yeah, I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we talked about the things we talked about.
Yeah. Okay, your song for next week. A few weeks ago, you mentioned that you weren't familiar with any Janis Joplin songs, so I'm going to get you to listen to a Janis Joplin song. So she was in a band called The Big Brother and the Holding Company, and they wrote a song and released a song called "A Piece of My Heart," which is my favorite performance by Janis Joplin. So that is your song for next week, "Piece of My Heart" by the Big Brother and the Holding Company.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, let's get into it. Never really listened to Janis Joplin, but I'm here for it.
Yeah,
and
this song would have been.
You already know.
Would have been released. My song would have been released, I think, mid to late '60s, if I remember correctly. Sorry, go on. Yeah, I cut you off.
Okay. And you already know you're listening to the song "Blood on the Leaves" by Kanye West from his 2013 Yeezus album. And as I've been reflecting on it, I do want to give the disclaimer: there really isn't that much of a political message in the song. It's we'll talk about it next week, but don't expect anything too political or provocative, we'll say.
No problem at all. Looking forward to it. All right, let's do this day in music history, and this is a kind of fun one, so I thought I would do this one just to clear the air a little bit. We just talked about a very heavy topic for about 40 minutes, so let's go in a different direction. So on this date, July 28th, 1969, police in Moscow reported that thousands of public phone booths had been vandalized after thieves were stealing parts of the phones to convert their acoustic guitars to electric. A feature in a Russian youth magazine had shown details on exactly how to steal parts out of a phone to make your acoustic guitar electric. So that is amazing. I love that story. That warms my heart.
That's some good DIY right there.
That is some very good DIY. And I thought, in celebration of that story, let's listen to "Anyone Can Play Guitar" by Radiohead. I love Radiohead, and we both love Radiohead, and I love that song.
Yeah, great song.
Okay, what are your plans the rest of the week?
Well, I'm going to see Deadpool and Wolverine on Saturday, so looking forward to that. Hoping it's a good movie. We will see.
Yes, I've heard mixed things about that movie, so yeah, I'd be curious myself. I do want to see that movie.
I hope it's fun.
Yeah, you want it to be funny, right? It's Deadpool. You hope it's funny.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I'm working. I'm still working. I don't think I have a day off until next weekend, I think, is my next day off. So I'm working straight through. I got 2 clients that I need to photograph tomorrow. Sunday, Monday, I'm working. I think I'm working right up until Friday. Then I think I have a day off on Saturday, but I could be wrong. So yeah, I'm busy. I'm making a lot of money, but I'm tired and I'm very busy.
Yeah, my God. Good luck with that. I just hope you're getting
Thank you.
some good sleep when you can.
When I can, yeah. When we end the podcast, I gotta get right back on the computer and start editing some photographs for some clients. So that's exactly what I'm going to do when I finish. Yeah, but I'm really so excited that we got a chance to deliver this episode. It's what a topic that we needed to talk about. So that was cool.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
For independent artists this week, it's someone we featured before and is a friend of mine. His name is Paul Rogers, and we're going to feature a new instrumental track that he's given us that has no name. So let's make up our own name. He says it's in the genre of funk jazz cinema, which is a genre he just made up. So let's call it the funk jazz cinema track. It's out of this is the blurb he sent me. Out of the furnace of the unified field comes a fun, catchy, and electric show tune. Here, Paul has done a 180-degree turn, leaving the deep messaging rock tunes and has come up for air with something a little otherworldly. There are keys, horns, and sirens all swirling around inside a disco drum beat. The bass line is pulsing, hypnotic, and will sync with your heart. Close your eyes and let your imagination run wild as you journey to the quantum realm. And as he said, maybe this will be on a soundtrack you hear down the road one day. So thank you, Paul, for letting us play your track. And Nick, yeah, we'll talk to you next week.
You got it.
You've been listening to Just Hit Play. To contact your hosts, Peter and Nick, or to be featured on an episode as musical talent, email justhitplay7300@gmail.com. Keep up to date with news and announcements by following on Instagram and Facebook, linked in the show notes. Subscribe on your favourite podcatcher to tune in next week for more sonic delights. And if you can't wait till then, check out the Just Hit playlist on Spotify, linked in the show notes. A special thanks to Braden Munch for the theme song, and thank you for listening.